take a moment for a little bit to look at the negative team's arguments and look at the affirmative team's arguments. In this speech, I'm going to be responding to my opponent's last speech and proving to you how all of those arguments don't actually stand, and then finally bringing up two voting issues of my opponent. The first argument that he brought up was that the BOP will probably lie about the affirmative team's plan. However, we do have other enforcement in our 1AC, and we don't believe that's a big issue. Then they brought up the argument that we still need solvency, and I definitely agree. We need to solve our plan. It's not just a comparative advantage and it doesn't have any of the problems. We do need solvency, we need to solve our plan. However, we do have solvency. We are solving our plan. I'm going to be showing you this in the next point, which is that he brought up the COVID isolation and SHU that already have a visit. I'd like to respond to this by saying the 1AC, in the 1AC, our 1AC says there is no visitation. And this was from a much more recent date than theirs was. So the one we did hand them was not from the 1AC, but it was from 2013. The one in our 1AC is from 2020, from November 25th, 2020. So the one from the 1AC does prove that there is no visitation. The BOP themselves in their own website said there is no visitation. Even though they did in 2016, they now no longer have visitation for SHU. But second, I'd like to respond to this by it's not COVID if you are in isolation for a month. It's not COVID if you're in isolation for a month. The negative team claims that the piece of evidence from our 1AC is for COVID. However, it's not COVID if you're in isolation for a month. People are placed in SHU for a month, and that's not COVID problems. They lose out on those visitation because they're in isolation, they're alone, they're not double bunked, and yet they don't get the visitations just because of COVID, that they should only be in there for 10 days. Next I'd like to bring up, next they brought up the argument of staff is needed in either way, whether you need extra staff or whether there's no staff, there's going to be a problem. I'd like to say, first of all, even if we don't need staff, there is not going to be a problem because that's the current system. We're not changing anything about the staff. So that means that in the current system, it's already happening by passing our plan. It doesn't increase this. It keeps it the way it is. However, he said if we do pass our plan, there will be staff needed. I'd like to respond to this that it's already in the current system. He was talking about how staff is needed for safety, staff is needed for these visitations. However, we have this in our visitation rules. If they had asked for this, we would have given it to them. We talked about it in our visitation, the BOP talked about it in the visitation rules, how staff are not needed, how there is enough, not staff is not needed, but staff, there is staff and safety measures in there. So we don't need to worry about staff because in our visitation rules, we do talk about the safety issue and how staff isn't really needed because we have no safety issue. But now it's time to get into my two voting issues. My first voting issue is that inmates in isolation are barred from visits. Inmates in isolation are barred from visits. Inmates in isolation aren't allowed these visits from their families. And this is a really big issue. Now the negative would like you to think that inmates are allowed visitation. But as I've proven through this speech, the people in SHU, those in isolation who are in SHU are not receiving visitors. They are not receiving visitors. And we can't let them continue to be barred from visitation. It harms them, as we proved in our 1AC. We talked about how it decreases or increases their bad behavior. And so in my second voting issue is that of better life after prison and better life in prison. Better life after prison and better life in prison. Because through our plan, by passing our plan, there will be reduced recidivism and increased jobs after prison. Recidivism isn't an issue anymore. There is increased jobs after prison. That means when prisoners get out, they have no employment problem. They can easily get a job because their family has helped them through family visits. But the family visits have decreased recidivism and increased jobs, but it also increases good behavior in prison. That means those who are in prison, those who are in solitary confinement for doing something bad, through the family visits, they realize they're wrong and they start to change and they increase the good behavior. This is all proven through studies in our advantages. So as you can see through our plan, inmates are barred from isolation. They aren't allowed visits. They aren't allowed to see family. But if you pass our plan, they will be allowed to see families and they won't have to have that problem anymore. Thank you, and it's been a pleasure speaking.
affirmative team for debating us. It was a lot of fun, and thank you so much.
So you